Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today in this Native webinar session. I am Jack Newman. I'm the Sales and Partner Manager in the UK for Native, and I'm delighted to be joined by my dear colleague, Kieran Jones. Kieran, good morning.
Good morning, Jack. Good to be here with you. Yeah, for those that don't know me, I'm Kieran Jones, implementation consultant for Native here in the UK.
Brilliant. And so, as always during our webinars, we invite you to share your comments, your questions, even your challenges through the LinkedIn chat, through the YouTube link that's on our website, or you can, of course, follow up by email directly after the session. And so, to kick things off, a few weeks ago, we were very fortunate to be invited to speak as part of the APSCO Outsourced Members Meeting, where along with some really interesting inputs from other speakers and contributors, we discussed the evolution of the MSP and VMS market. And so I really want to kick the session off by providing some kind of recap and overview to that. And that then leads us to the relevant changes and more challenges, should I say, that the VMS market has to try and manage. And we really find that quite often those challenges are paradoxical. And for us as a technology organization, it really challenges us to try and make sense of them and to provide mechanisms in which technology can mitigate and underpin this continuing evolution. And as a VMS, we're in a fairly privileged position to have really clear oversight into what is happening within the contingent worker market, to understand what the MSP market is delivering against that, and critically what the end customer expects from these types of solutions. And so if we kick things off and we start with this concept of change, and to reinforce here that what we see are some of the typical forces that dictate why we need to develop our service and tooling, both on an MSP front and a VMS front. For me, the massive one is always around the evolving expectations of the customer, always wanting better, faster, often for less, wanting more holistic talent solutions. And that's really driven by the innovation in technology. It's enabling them to often do more, often by doing less. And this boom in innovative technologies and this drive for digital transformation is a drive across all different markets. It's really driven by the need to deliver new innovative products to their customers. We've got things as well, such as legislative change, things such as Brexit, IR35. Greet Brosens, who was in our APSCO Outsourced meeting, said that in a market survey that they conducted last year, 60% of organizations within that survey were directly impacted by IR35. And they've had to make significant changes to their business as a result. And one of the biggest forces that is really changing the landscape of our customers right now is this widening talent supply gap and the real need to get it right when it comes to talent. And we've spoken about this war for talent for years, but actually there's always been a war for talent. The issue now is really there's such a large gap that it begins to drive this notion of reskilling and upskilling. And actually, I read that last year it represented the biggest candidate shortage since 1997. So we enter this time of skills-based hiring. And to bring things full circle, I think really what that means is that the workforce construct and the makeup of an organization is very, very different today to that of 10 years ago. And that is really why contingent workforce is so critical. The reality is that when it's managed effectively, it can offer a greater measure of stability, greater flexibility, and it can be really critical for our customers in achieving their business outcomes. And now more of this centers around talent, and that supply and demand gap for us in the VMS market and all of our MSP and RPO partners, it represents an enormous opportunity for all of us. So to start, let's kind of rewind a little bit and think around the kind of the historic elements of the contingent worker market. Traditionally, it's been purely seen as an extension of the workforce, really for non-core business. And that paradigm, I think, has finally shifted. And what we see now is that leading companies, they're embracing contingent workers. They've realized that in order to leverage skills of the market, they need to tap into this really large, diverse pool of highly skilled workers. And I think that means that we're in the golden age for contingent workforce. And one of the interesting points that we often see is that organizations are leveraging contingent workers as a direct cost saving measure. And that's something that we've been doing now for quite some time. Now, I wasn't here during the early evolution of the MSP market, but I would say that what you've got here on this slide are some of the typical drivers for wanting to leverage an MSP. But as we all know, those drivers, those expectations have evolved. And so we can see that this evolution over the last 20 years has taken the market really from being more focused on addressing cost, compliance, visibility, and supplier management, really to a point where they are the mere expectations. And whilst, of course, they can add value, they aren't necessarily seen as a value add. They are expected. And actually thinking about why organizations do leverage an MSP, those drivers will typically span things like financial impact, helping with spend consolidation. A staffing industry analysts survey in 2020 said that 84% of organizations experienced cost savings from their MSP program, and 76% experienced direct and indirect cost savings from their use of a VMS. So there's a whole load of changing reasons here as to why organizations want to leverage that. Now, Kieran, you've obviously been involved in both sides of the table. You've worked within the MSP market for a long time, and you've now joined us on the dark side within the technology market. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen within that market? And maybe we can start with the MSP.
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that over the years, the requirements, expectations, and complexities of an MSP program have changed beyond anything that could have been expected 10 to 15 years or more ago. As you mentioned, I've been involved in both sides of the equation myself. I started out at the operational end of an MSP, taking bookings, sending jobs out to a supply chain, and following that, a chain of other roles, going from system admin for a number of supporting systems, implementing those systems from the HR partner side. And now, of course, I've hopped over the fence, and I'm now implementing, configuring, and consulting for our partners in the use of our system. During that time, there was a huge shift in the expectation of the average MSP program. It used to be as simple as get our jobs filled and ensure I have visibility of my workforce. Now it's a different story. Now, of course, filling jobs and visibility are still very key, but in addition to that, there's expectations that an MSP can, as standard, do all sorts of extra things too, like tracking everything against a complex cost allocation code structure and providing flexible reporting on absolutely everything. It could be any element of that program whatsoever. Integrating with multiple different systems for multiple different reasons, managing project and statement of work spend, all sorts of other tasks there as well. So it's just become the expected. And all of that is just from my own personal experience in my relatively short, or at least I like to think relatively short, 12-year involvement in the subject. It's also fair to say that an MSP program used to be reserved for an enterprise level organization. You typically wouldn't have dreamt of standing up an MSP for an organization that had a small spend, say anything perhaps less than 100 million. These days, the mid-market are demanding MSP solutions more than ever. You'll now typically see organizations with the spend just in the brackets of sort of 5 to 50 million wanting this sort of solution in place. And just because their spend is smaller, don't think for a second that makes their requirements any simpler. So I guess to summarize, essentially everything has changed significantly over the years. And so far we've only touched on the MSP itself. We haven't even touched on the technology or the VMS that supports it.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point. So you consider the changes there from an MSP perspective. How does that then impact the VMS and the technology?
Well, unsurprisingly, when you reflect on what we've just been discussing, that the functionality of a VMS, or at the very least the expectation of what a VMS can or should be able to do, has also changed quite dramatically over the years. Back when I was first involved in an MSP, there wasn't even a VMS in place. Would you believe all jobs were being distributed by phone and by email and were being tracked on a spreadsheet? All candidate data was also being sent by email, and when someone was placed into their assignment, there was an incredibly simple timesheet portal that they were being created in. Now, this is obviously unthinkable by these days standards, particularly when this was on no small scale either. It was a nationwide logistics firm that we were engaged with. But at the time, it was a perfectly acceptable solution. So that kind of spells out how much things have changed. So we wind the clock forward a few years, and it's a basic expectation that there's software in place to not only cover the end-to-end process, but also to provide a host of value-add services too, such as program evaluation, cost monitoring, cost saving, artificial intelligence, and predictive analytics, and of course the management of multiple different areas in addition to the traditional contingent, such as permanent or statement of work. On top of all of this is the expectation, there's an expectation more and more that this sort of solution can be stood up in a very short amount of time, and also that it can be entirely customized to suit the needs of the scenario. So I guess, again, in summary, both the MSP and the VMS are a whole other ballgame these days.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned kind of organizations leveraging Excel. They still exist today. And I think that kind of leads into another question that I've got. I think, the market isn't perfect, right? And there are still kind of some long-standing challenges that the market faces. What do you think some of those kind of long-standing challenges are that still exist and maybe haven't yet been overcome?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are, of course, some long-standing challenges in this area. Some of the key ones we're going to discuss today as they form part of the workforce paradoxes that we're here to challenge. For me, these challenges are deployment time, scope of customization, and how technology can help with long-standing challenges such as filling the skills gap or closing the gender pay gap, for example.
Yeah, that's interesting, Kieran. And I think if we then kind of pull that back into really what this means for a VMS, and again linking that back to evolving customer expectations, there's a Daft Punk quote that explains it really quite well here in relation to what the customer expects of us jointly from an MSP, but also from a VMS. And we see organizations being driven towards an MSP or a VMS because of their total talent management ambitions, their need for transparency, management, control access, and things like full end-to-end services procurement. And we really see that in relation to this talent demand and supply gap, that talent finally becomes the priority. Finding the best quality talent in niche markets is now absolutely crucial to the success of any program. You touched upon it, actually. The scope of workers has gotten wider. The need for expertise has gotten larger. So it extends the demands of traditional models, and it forces the market towards a more fluid, more hybrid model of delivery that looks at contingent, permanent, and statement of work. And you also touched on the fact that it's about an MSP and a VMS being fit for all. So not just the enterprise market, the mid-market really is a thriving one, and it's one where there remains still a really large opportunity within the MSP and VMS space. And I think also we're learning that there's no sector that is irrelevant to an MSP. There's a white collar, a blue collar mix. And so really that addressable market that's mature enough for an MSP has gotten bigger. We've also then got things like the classification of workers and managing compliance risk, looking at freelancers, contractors, things like IR35 guidance and determination. And listen, organizations are still needing lots of help in that area. So there's still an opportunity for us to all support on that. You touched on a couple of the kind of the technological advances, things like future state analytics to drive things such as workforce planning. You touched upon the kind of DE&I agenda, and absolutely, as a minimum, you are expected to be impactful. And so social impact has become more important. And some of the other things that we see is often around an MSP and us as a technology partner, teaching organizations the art of self-sufficiency. But I think the fundamental shift in how we operate with the end market now is that we're required to act much more as a strategic advisor and a strategic partner to those customers, and not simply as a technology vendor or a talent supplier. And it's really critical when we think back to those evolving expectations. It has a really, really significant impact on the MSP and also then on the VMS as the underpinning technology and what we're expected to deliver and satisfy. And so to kind of cut a long story short, from a VMS perspective, the tech market is really, really quickly evolving. And so those expectations are always growing at a really fast pace. And for us, it means that as a VMS isn't just a VMS anymore. The scope is much larger. The functional requirements are wider, and it has to be appropriate for everyone. It has to enable the future proofing of the organization's requirements and their own talent roadmap. And so what we've come to talk about today, and the real core purpose of this session, is that we will often find that as a VMS provider, there are certain different paradoxes that we are able to consider how we can support within the objectives and drivers of them. And what you see here is some of the different paradoxes that we come across, and we want to be able to talk to each of these and demonstrate some of them within this session. So, Kieran, let's start with this concept of speed and agility and customization. I think, the real challenge here with this one is that our end customers, our MSP partners, they typically want a solution that can be stood up really, really quickly with really agile implementation methodology, but also then have it customized to all of the specific requirements of the customer to ensure relevancy. Now, obviously, in your experience of being an implementation consultant, I'm sure you've come across this many different times. First question that I have is, what are your kind of thoughts on this idea of wanting quick and agile, but also at the same time customization and relevancy?
Well, you're right, Jack. This is literally the classic request when it comes to system implementation. We'll hear it time and time again. We always will. The request is we need the system to do exactly what we want it to do. It needs to support the current embedded processes, the systems, and even the organizational culture of the organization it's going to be implemented for. And we also need it ready to go in the next couple of weeks. And my thoughts on this are, well, sure, this is a challenge. This is always going to be a challenge. But why shouldn't an organization be able to expect all of those things?
Yeah, and we're in an on-demand world now, right? So we expect things very, very quickly. We expect certainly from technology that it supports engagement and adoption. But from a technology standpoint, what are some of the challenges that technology has typically had with that expectation?
Well, there's a balance to be had here, and that balance is the challenge in my eyes. The balance is the expectation of the client on the one side and what's realistically possible on the other side. And what that typically means, particularly if you look at a traditional single tenant VMS, is that customization, if possible at all, takes time. So then thinking back to your last question, therein lies the problem. You need to customize to meet the client's expectations, which takes time, but the client also expects you to stand the solution up very quickly. To deliver so quickly, typically you need to compromise and go for a more standard approach, and there is our paradox.
Yeah, no, and it makes sense, and it's it's kind of I want a Ferrari, but I've got a Fiat Punto budget, isn't it?
Now you're talking my language, Jack.
And so if we kind of bring that back then to Netive, and we maybe move into our system, from your knowledge and experience, Kieran, how is that then a paradox which we can help to navigate through?
So yeah, I guess the question here, in the context of our system, how can we combat this? And there's one very key important phrase I'm going to say here, and it's multi-tenancy. In basic terms, multi-tenancy is the ability to set up multiple clients, multiple configurations, multiple customizations, all within the same single environment. Traditionally, VMS systems are single tenant, so that means you have to have a whole new environment for each new client. Implementing a whole new environment, as I'm sure every one of our audience right now know, this takes a long time. Like, it can take a really long time. So being able to add new clients to your already existing environment immediately takes a big chunk of that time away. What's more is, while every MSP program is different and unique, there will always be similarities between your programs too. So let's say, for example, you're in the process of implementing your fifth client into your VMS. You spend time with the client discussing and determining what their processes, workflows, and needs are. And on reflection, you realize that actually what they're asking for is a mix of what your clients 1, 2, 3, and 4 already have. Perhaps they've got a job requisition workflow that one of your clients uses, a candidate journey workflow that another uses, and so on. Now, you don't have any existing client with this specific needs of requirements, but you do have a collection of workflows that when mixed and matched can fit many of their needs. In a single tenant environment, you could well have a situation where you're asking for workflows identical to the ones you already have to be copied, or even worse, completely rebuilt in a new environment to suit your client's needs. This may require developers, which generally means waiting for availability on a sprint, potentially a long wait. It could be stuck in a backlog. Our multi-tenant solution and supporting tooling and our fantastic partnership model makes this a thing of the past. If you've attended any of our previous online events, you may recall an event last year where we implemented a new customer into our VMS in 7 minutes. No tricks, no misdirection. That's just the power of Native and the multi-tenancy. So we talked there about reusing the existing workflows you have for a client, but what if you need something new? Well, luckily that's no problem either, and it still requires no developers and no backlog. I'm going to demonstrate the tooling we use to make this possible shortly, but before we do, I just want to demonstrate some of the other benefits and key features of multi-tenancy that allow us to be so agile in our approach. So what we can see here is an example of our VMS system. Now, everything you're about to see is all within the one system. It's all in the one environment. So firstly, one of the things we'd like to point out, a question that comes up quite often is, but if I don't have my own environment for each customer, how can I have branding? How can they have the look and feel that they want? Well, that's absolutely possible. You can see here the same system. You can tell I've got the same tasks, the same everything essentially, but new color schemes, new graphics, new logos. This spans across the whole system right from the login page onwards. So this is something you can have in place. It really helps with system adoption and making users feel at home. You can also see right here, now we're not going to jump into the administration of a system, don't worry, but what you can see here is straight away you've got a list of your clients. Now you've got 4, adding a new one, hit new, create a new record, you start the customization yourself. You don't have to have any reliance externally for that. You just do all of the setup yourself. What we can also see is as an admin or as an MSP user, someone sitting across your system, again, you don't need multiple logins. You're not logging in, you're not logging out to service the multiple different programs that you have running. We can see here if you go to create a new job requisition, straight away, I've got access to all 3 of those clients. Now, it could be all 3. It could be that you've got an MSP team that covers 2, 3, 4. You can mix and match and you can have access to whatever you need to, all via the same one login. We'll jump back out of the application for a sec, and we're going to go into the workflow, the workflow configuration tool that I mentioned earlier. Sorry. And what we're seeing here is it's a tool that I demo quite often, and a fairly frequent misconception is that this is essentially a diagram tool. So it's like a Visio or just something to make the diagram, the flow. But actually, this is the programming tool itself. And what we're looking at here is a job requisition workflow. This is a very, very simple workflow where a new requisition is created and it's immediately sent out to an MSP team. Now, this could be in place for an existing customer who wants to change, or it could be that you have a new client coming in, and actually this is the perfect workflow apart from maybe 1 or 2 changes. And changing this workflow really is as simple as us bringing in a new status, linking them up, and from here we will then say we're putting an HR approval step in place essentially. So we will go through, we will label these transitions to whatever they need to be, and from there we will save, and then we promote that directly into your test environment right from the system here. There's no developers involved, there's no backlog. We can even do this collaboratively on a call together, or back in the good old days where we sat in a meeting room together and did these sort of things. So this is a very, very brief example of how this works, but it demonstrates the agility that we can bring to the table, and it removes all of these barriers, these long waits, and it helps combat that need for agility and fast reactiveness, basically. So what we've looked at here today is essentially just scratching the surface, but it should help to show how it's possible to remain fast, responsive, and agile, even when reacting to a very specific set of requirements and customization needs.
Yeah, thank you, Kieran. That is, I think that's really, really powerful, and to kind of bring I guess, this paradox then to a close. I think, the natural expectation is that the tech leverages a really flexible, scalable infrastructure, fully on cloud. Our favorite word, multi-tenant. So yeah, it has to allow for customization or standardization to really ensure relevancy to the program. It has to enable speed and agility in its implementation and its ongoing program development. Component-led functionality, you kind of touched upon that. So the ability to turn functionality on and off, and again, ensure relevancy to the customer. But critically, the thing that you've touched on just there within that workflow configuration tool is the ability for rapid change management. So it's not something that the VMS market is typically used to, but not having development requirements to make change and optimization to the system can be really, really powerful. So thank you, Kieran. That was really, really helpful. I want to just quickly move on then to our kind of next paradox, which is this idea of enterprise grade product with a mid-market volume. So as many of you will know in our audience, Netive has positioned itself as the best placed mid-market VMS solution. And actually, in both myself and Kieran joining the organization, this was a gap in the market which we were already aware of. It was often spoke of. And I think the real challenge here is that organizations do not want big, bulky, expensive technologies that take 6 months to implement and 6 months to then make a change, particularly when they're only of a mid-market volume, because it just is not plausible. But what they do want is an enterprise-grade solution. They expect a tool that can be functionally and operationally fit for purpose, but really also sit within their realms of commercial viability. Kieran, why has this been such a big challenge for the market?
Well, I think you've already touched on it. For me, the answer to this is clear, and it does come down to several things, but one of the biggest factors is always going to be that commercial viability piece. Typically, enterprise grade solutions come with enterprise grade price tags, as you might expect. So when a mid-market client has a need or a desire to implement an MSP solution, they often have a hard decision to make. Do they invest a very large amount of money in terms of their business, let's say 80 to 120k perhaps, it could be more depending on integration needs and so on. Do they invest that into bringing in a solution that's designed specifically for a very large enterprise scenario to meet their needs, or do they go without? The vast majority of the time, the answer to this will be to go without, simply because while they still have that need, without a viable, commercially sound solution, there's just no way that sort of investment can be justified. For me, this is the number one reason, but certainly not the only reason. We could also include functional elements. Many solutions that do fall into that lower price brackets that do make them commercially viable often lack key functionalities that you tend to only see in an enterprise grade solution. Functionality, for example, such as cross-border compliance, multi-currency support, multi-country and language support, and so on. But as you've mentioned, we do pride ourselves on being an enterprise grade solution that's absolutely fit for the mid-market and mid-market volumes. So let's dive into what makes us so confident in saying that, because it's a bold statement. How can we offer this? How can we offer this functionality where others struggle to? Well, this all links back again. We keep saying it, but it links back to multi-tenancy. This is what makes the dream work, and that is because while the solution is fully functional and ready to serve the enterprise market, you're only paying to implement the platform once. Once that implementation is done, you're essentially just configuring for each new client that follows. As the platform is already there, there's a huge time saving and therefore a huge cost saving to be had. And what this means is you no longer need to have an enterprise grade wallet to have an enterprise grade solution, which in turn opens the doors of possibility to be implemented for the mid-market or lower volume clients.
Yeah, and one of the things that we will often come across, Kieran, in particularly in this mid-market space, is that we'll often see that a customer can have small amounts of spend in various different countries. So let's say they have a small kind of wallet in country A, small spend in country B. They then have a slightly larger spend in country C. how are we kind of managing that and I guess mitigating against that commercial viability piece within the tool?
Yeah, this is a common question. It's something that we are fully prepared for. So I guess let's jump back into the system and take a look at a few quick examples.
Perfect.
So I'm just going to show a few different screens just to demonstrate that. We'll start off here. This is an email template. So this sits across the whole of the communication system. And what you can see is a fairly simple email here letting someone know that there's a new requisition requiring their action, their approval. But what you'll also see is in this particular environment, we've got several different languages enabled. So that same email on the same triggers and so on, that can be sent out depending on the needs of the user that's receiving it. So they can see it in their own native language. You're not rebuilding time and time again to ensure that every user is being serviced, or even putting different workflows in for different countries unless you really need to. That framework sits across the whole system. So again, we're now looking at a role. Now, software developer makes perfect sense here in English for English speakers, but perhaps not in another country. So again, we can see that framework sits right here as well, right across so many different entities in the system. We've got an example here of the role, but that can be the client itself. It can be the business units for departments. Pretty much every entity through the system, you can put multiple translations to support the scenario that you have. And the last example that we'll cover for now is compliance. So we can see here a compliance template, what we call a digital file template. Now, this has got lots of different variables you can select. So this could be for specific role categories or roles, certain worker contract types and so on. But what we'll focus on here is when this is for an assignment. So when an assignment is created, when the nationality of the worker is, in this case, it's a non-EU worker. And when the work is based within the EU, there is a certain set of requirements that are needed. Now, it could be that you're doing this at the moment. You might be doing it manually in a different system, and someone's sitting there thinking, okay, well, yeah, this is non-EU, this is EU, and so on. The system will do all of this for you. This is all under the one client. It doesn't matter if there's only 10 workers that are working in a non-EU country or an EU country or whatever it might be. The system just knows, and it will do it for you, and it will apply those correct compliance requirements. Keep that transparency in the system and ensure the entire program remains compliant. So if we couple all of this with the fact that the commercial hurdle has been removed, and you truly do have that enterprise grade solution that's ready and waiting for the mid-market.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Kieran, because it is a challenge that we will often come across in the market, and it's being able to first of all justify it commercially, but then support it functionally. And you touch on the critical elements. It's all facilitated through multi-tenancy. It's having then those different functional elements such as multi-language, multi-currency, being able to kind of manage cross-border compliance. And to your kind of final point, I think it removes certainly that commercial and functional hurdle, and it ensures that you can plug in an enterprise-grade solution across your organization and make that inclusive then of low-spending countries, because it's typically been a really, really big challenge for the market. So thank you, Kieran. Moving on then, the next paradox that we want to talk about is probably my favorite. One of the biggest challenges that we hear in the market at the moment is this war for talent, this perceived skills shortage. What do you make of it, Kieran? Why do you think this is such a big issue in this moment?
Well, undeniably, there is a challenge within employment at the moment. Unemployment is falling. In December alone, in the UK, we saw employers adding a record 184,000 new jobs to their payrolls. Now, while it's obviously fantastic news that the market's recovering following the pandemic, this in itself brings its own challenges. For employers who are looking to fill vacancies, there's less talent available in the market. Those that are out there working, they're perhaps not as actively looking for a role. They might have only just moved into a new role or so on. And it can all of this can make it a lot harder to find the right talent for the roles that they're looking to fill.
Yeah, and I think we have a similar outlook on this, Kieran, but I have maybe a stronger view on this, that I don't think organizations have ever particularly prioritized investing in their view of skills access. So they've not invested in building skills taxonomies or knowledge graphs, and if they have, they've not done it particularly well. So they've never really understood, first of all, what is already available to them. They've never then, as a result of that, been able to know what they need to look for. If we think again about technology, we've generally seen higher adoption of AI-driven tools, and that's driven by more mature market awareness. But it does open the opportunity here to better utilize cognitive and AI technologies to allow for skills taxonomies, skills understanding, to be able to look at things like future state modeling and strategic workforce scenario planning. And that then kind of leads us into this concept and opportunity to be able to leverage something that, Kieran, we often refer to as skills-based hiring in our advanced workforce analytics engine. And so, yeah, first of all, what do you make of that, Kieran? What can be kind of done to start mitigating this issue?
Well, first off, I think you're absolutely right, and I think particularly because there's less people looking for work right now, it's more important than ever for an organisation to explore their own internal skills base when they're looking to hire. If an organisation has no visibility of the skills that are already in their organisation, then how can they leverage them? To give a really simplistic example, if they're unable to see that the roles they're looking to fill typically use 10 skills, 7 of those skills are already held in-house by another role that they commonly recruit for or they have an abundance of, then how can they target upskilling their own team or perhaps targeting candidates in that other role with a view to upskill them to close the gap? This is where a powerful analytics engine can come into its own. And to demonstrate that, we're going to jump back into the system for the last time. So what we can see here is an example of our advanced workforce analytics module. It leverages the power of Tableau CRM from Salesforce, and as such, it's fully embedded into your VMS. But what's more is you can feed other data sources into the tool as well, such as data from a CRM, an HR system, or literally any other source of data. And what we're looking at right now is a database of around 140,000 skills that are attached to just over 10,000 candidates that have been hired or submitted into the VMS. What this dashboard is going to let you do is really interrogate that data and use it proactively to help close that skills gap. Let's look at an example. So you've historically struggled to fill roles where the candidate needs to have a certain skill set in Oracle. Jobs are going unfilled, your targeted job postings, they're just not working. What can you do? Using our analytics module, you can immediately search your entire database for an Oracle skill set. So before we do that, let's have a quick look at the dashboard and see what we can see. So this is showing the total candidates you have in the system right now. You've got your average bill rate, you've got a full list of all the skills across your entire database, the roles in which that they are hired, and amongst other things, you then have an average rate forecast for those roles as well. So we'll dive right in here and let's search across that database for candidates that have got an Oracle skill of some description. Now we can see the whole dashboard there augments. We can now see there's 160 candidates in this database right now that have some form of Oracle skill mentioned. You can see the average bill rate has changed as well, and on the right hand side here we can see the list of every single role that has been hired into. So what this allows you to do is you get this visibility of actually you might be looking at a certain role, a certain segment to try and fill these jobs, but actually there could be a role in here that is a whole untapped market. You may not have realized that your application administrators or project leaders really commonly have got these Oracle skills that you might need. This is then in turn going to allow you to amend your job requisitions, change where you're posting, or potentially look at candidates you already have in your pool who are perhaps those 1 or 2 skills away from this role that you're really struggling with historically, and upskilling them. So it lets you be proactive, it lets you be reactive, and you can then upskill your talent pool, and in doing so you're closing that gap down, you're making it easier to hire, and you're enriching what you're able to as an MSP, offer out to your client, or as an end client. You're getting that value add. You're getting people you didn't even know existed that have the skills that you need. So suddenly this becomes a really incredibly powerful tool that allows you to not only recruit more effectively, but also to target pockets of your existing pool and upskill them to close that skills gap that you have in your program. We could dig into this far more and explore the possibilities, but we're probably running short of time by this point. So I think it's probably my cue to hand back over to you, Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. I mean, I think that is amazing. And I think what we kind of see there within that tool is that, it's simple enough for users who aren't hugely tech oriented, but it's also complex enough for more advanced users. So allowing you to get that skills oversight, be able to run kind of gap analysis against the skills that aren't currently available in your business, and really interrogate all of that data, ask the system questions, run predictive analytics to make sense of, what happens if. And, we at Netive, we truly believe that this type of tool can act as a really potent engine to drive workforce maturity and clear understanding of what is happening across your organization. And we hope that you agree. So this kind of brings us just towards the end of the session. Naturally, we want to hear from you. So, do you feel that some of these challenges currently exist in your program? Do you have additional challenges, and are there other paradoxes which you come across? There certainly are. There are many, many more. And so we'd love to be able to discuss those with you. So if you have any challenges or any new or existing programs that incorporate some of these challenges, then please feel free to reach out to myself or Kieran, either by email, through our website, or through LinkedIn. And let's talk about them. Let's understand how technology can underpin some of those challenges and help to mitigate them in your workforce management programs. Kieran, I can't let you go without asking you a question around the future. So I hope you've got your magic ball there. If you could kind of make some predictions, let's say, around how the VMS market might change in the future and what the kind of future expectations might look like, what would you say to that?
For me, the predictions are clear. The trends that we've seen over the previous years will continue to evolve. The demand for customization is only going to increase. The expectation to provide further value add functionality to follow the markets is going to continue as well. Using the wealth of data that's naturally gathered via an MSP program to enrich programs through predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, the need for that is going to become more important than ever. And not only for the example we've given here, such as the skills-based hiring scenarios, but it can also be used in other really key areas, such as looking to close the gender pay gap, or tracking and driving diversity and inclusion. There's an infinite number of scenarios and solutions that can be brought in just using that data. So I think data is key here. It's already key, but it's going to become more and more important and potent as time goes on.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I think data is king. You kind of mentioned that, but it's what you do with that data, right? It's being able to ingest it, normalize it, be able to understand it, and then make it actionable right at the heart of your business strategy. So that's really, really important, and I think that kind of forms the next part of the journey that our market goes on. It's taking organizations from being kind of data oriented to being really data driven, and I'm really interested to see where we go with this skills piece. So that brings us to the end. We've got 2 minutes left, so we can give everybody 2 minutes back, which you probably didn't expect, but we are very generous like that. Thank you all very much for attending today. We hope that the session served as useful. Kieran, thank you very much for your time in joining the session. It was really, really useful. We hope that you guys enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.